Welcome to Scoop and Scale, where we dish up the science and weigh the facts about mostly equine nutrition. I'm Jill Jackson, lifelong equestrian, podcast producer, and pony owner. I'm a dressage rider and at-home horse keeper, living the challenge of managing easy keepers on multiple acres of pasture.
And I'm equine nutrition consultant, Dr. Claire Tunis of Clarity Equine Nutrition. I develop diet plans for horses ranging from metabolic seniors to Olympic athletes. I also consult for equine nutrition companies. I'm a scientist, dressage rider, and pony club mom.
Claire and I have been horse friends for almost 20 years, and like all good horse friends, we're always talking horses. We talk about the challenges of managing our horses, our riding struggles, feeding horses, and what's going on in the wider equine community. This podcast is a place for us to have conversations mostly about equine nutrition. It's for anyone who wants to make better choices when it comes to feeding their horses.
And before we get started, a quick disclaimer. The information in this podcast is general and not meant to replace the individualized advice of your own qualified equine nutritionist or veterinarian. And while I have a PhD in nutrition, I'm not a veterinarian and can't give medical advice.
With that, thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the following episode. I think it is fairly common that periodically as horse owners, we wonder if there is a better feed product out there for our horses. Maybe a great new feed has been introduced to the market that we aren't aware of, and suddenly we find ourselves Googling horse feeds and trying to compare products. Or maybe you're old school and you're actually standing in the feed store doing this. What info is actually available to you as you make these comparisons, and what does it actually mean? How can you use this to make a good choice for your horse? This is what we're going to cover today. Let's start the conversation by answering the question of what information is readily available about feeds that we as horse owners can use to compare products and make informed decisions.
That's a great question. And there are some pieces of information that must be available on that feed. We refer to this as the feed label or feed tag. And traditionally, this was a little piece of like heavy paper, lightweight card that had all this information printed on it, and it was sewn into the top or bottom of the bag. And in many instances, this is still how it is. But some companies have replaced this with printed information directly on the bag. And typically, you will also find this same information on their website. So if you're in the feed store, you are looking at the printed bag and possibly this paper tag. And if you're browsing online, you should find that same information on a company or product website.
Specifically, what information is it?
So there's several pieces of information that are legally required to be on a tag or bag. And know that when I say bag or tag, that same information these days will likely also be on the company's website. So that information is the name of the product and the brand name, its purpose statement, the guaranteed analysis, the ingredient list, the directions for use, the product's net weight, any caution statements that the product might have, the company's contact information, and most likely there's going to be a lot number or date code somewhere on that bag as well. And often that's actually sometimes printed on the paper seam on the bottom of the bag. So that can be hard to find sometimes.
What's in a name or a purpose statement?
Right, so the name is quite straightforward, obviously, or so you would think, but it might not be. So the purpose statement lets you know the type of horse that feed can be fed to. So sometimes the name and the purpose statement are kind of one and the same. So I think a good example of that is something like senior. That's the name of the feed. It also happens to be the class of horse that feed is targeting. And, they're kind of telling you that this is a horse for senior feeds. Sometimes the name is less obvious. So, for example, something like, I can think of like Pro Force Fuel, which is made by Nutrena, like it doesn't really tell you what class of horse that is for, right? So the name suggests, if we think about it, it's probably a performance feed because they're talking about fuel, and Pro Force sounds sort of, athletic or whatever, but maybe not, right? So that feed would require a purpose statement to clarify who is that actually for. Is that for brood mares? Is it for yearlings? Like Pro Force Fuel? Could be fuel for yearlings, right? To help them grow. So It's not. It's a performance feed. So that purpose statement, that clarification has to be on the bag as well.
Yeah, I can think of some other names that don't really tell you like what they're for, like Altium. Not sure,
Right.
obviously if you read the bag, you're going to know, but Altium in itself doesn't tell you who should be eating that.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because Altium started off as just Altium. And now there's like a spread of like several Altium feeds. And the same thing happened with Safe Choice. So initially we just had Altium. And then we had Altium, I think it was Gastric Care or Gastric Care, where they put the seaweed-derived calcium in there to help with buffer stomach acid. And we also had like Altium Growth that was specifically made for young growing horses. And now I think Purina just came out with Altium Senior. So now it's like Altium now has become sort of like the name of a line of feeds, and Nutrena did the same thing with Safe Choice. So way back when Safe Choice, when it first came out, many people assumed that the name meant that it was a safe choice for horses with metabolic issues. I think around the time it came out, insulin dysregulation was just being recognized, and people were getting really interested in it. And here was this new feed called Safe Choice. And I think the assumption was that, well, it's going to be a safe choice for my metabolic horse. And in actual fact, the NSC on the original Safe Choice was like 20, I think it was 20% NSC or low 20s. So not a safe choice for an IR horse, although a much safer choice than, say, a traditional sweet feed, insofar as it was unlikely to cause gastrointestinal disruption. Now, of course, there are several safe choice feeds. So safe choices, again, a bit like Altium, it kind of became like an overarching name under which there were several versions of Safe Choice. So now there's Safe Choice Senior and Performance and Special Care. And, so there's multiple Safe Choices that now actually speak more directly. Safe Choice is more like the brand name, and then the feed name, Senior, Mare and Foal, Special Care, speak more directly to the purpose statement and the kind of horse that should be fed that feed. So, the purpose statement is useful when feeds kind of have names that don't directly allude to who they should be fed to.
Often at the top of the tag or clearly on the bag, it will say what form the feed is in, whether it's pelleted or texture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's true. And so on many feeds these days, the name, the brand name, purpose statement, and then the form are likely going to feature fairly prominently on the front of the bag. Very few feeds are packaged into plain brown or white bags anymore. I mean, when we think back many, many decades ago, most feed just came in plain white paper bags or plain brown paper bags, and the only text on that bag was on the tag. And this was a huge, printed bags are really expensive, but a plain white bag doesn't really, it doesn't speak to you on a shelf. Although, ironically, I think we've kind of gone back there with some of the kind of more feeds that try to be, speak to kind of natural ingredients. Things have gone back to brown paper bags. But over time, companies have realized that although it costs a lot to have fancy poly bags or even, multicolored printed paper bags, the real estate that is on that bag is so valuable as marketing space. The bags need to be appealing and stand out against competitors. So a good amount of this info is actually going to be on the front of the bag now. Even if the bag still uses a paper tag, you're probably going to have the name, the purpose statement, the type of horse it should be fed to on the front of the bag, along with some pretty picture, right? That's going to make you be like, oh, if I feed this, my horse will jump 5'6" or whatever, or do barrels in 14 seconds or whatever it is your discipline is, that the horse on the front speaks to you, that's going to be the right feed for your horse. But as we're going to hear here and we get into here, it may
it's
not be
the case. I was going to say my
Nope.
alfalfa pellets. My alfalfa pellets that I buy that come out of Nebraska, they're in a plain white bag. There's not a single print on it, and they just have the tag. That's it. Just, it's probably done by a smaller
Right. I mean,
mill.
what can you really say, right? Yeah.
Alfalfa pellets.
We have a saying in, right. Yeah, one and done. We have a saying in England that's become quite popular in recent years, which is it does what it says on the tin. Right. So if you have a can of something and it just says, sweet corn or whatever, that's just what it is. Right. And that's what the brown and white paper bags, like to your point, it's an alfalfa pellet. It's literally just alfalfa in a pellet in a bag. Like they don't need to spend a lot of money on fancy tricolor printed, bags. Like that's a waste of time and money. So, but when you get into the hyper competitive performance feed market, all bets are off.
Right. Typically on a tag after the name and the purpose statement comes the guaranteed analysis. And I think that this is part of the label that gives people, or that people should pay the most attention to and maybe confuses them the most.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is, if they do read the tag, or if it's on the bag, this is normally on the back, turn the bag over to read the back of the bag. This probably is the part that, they gravitate to and read first, because this is where you get the nutrient information of, what nutrition can you expect to get from this product. So there are minimum requirements of crude protein, crude fat, crude fiber, NDF, ADF, and ash on basic feeds. So you'll get even that, like on an alfalfa pellet, you're going to get that. On more complex feeds, you're also going to see some other things guaranteed, like calcium, phosphorus, copper, zinc, selenium, vitamin A. Those are, required to be on more complex horse feeds. And I think it's worth mentioning at this point that currently all this information on a bag or a tag is regulated at the state level. So different states may require slightly different things. So, there is a guideline standard that, AFCO comes up with, and AFCO stands for the Association of American Feed Control Officials. And, they have this guideline that the states work to. And most states adopt that guideline, but then some expand on it and require some additional things as well. So, for example, there are states that require both a minimum and a maximum selenium level, while others only require a minimum selenium level. So it gets a little tricky, because if you're buying feed in Virginia, you may see some things guaranteed on the tag, or some things on the tag that are going to be a little different than what you might see if you bought that feed in California. And across the board, if you make claims on the product about certain nutrient levels, so for example, if you say, you make a claim that feed has a certain amount of chromium in it or whatever, like you have to guarantee that. If you don't speak, like you could put chromium in your feed, not really mention it anywhere, and you don't have to guarantee it. But if you make a statement about the fact, if you mark it on the fact that there's chromium in that feed, then you have to guarantee that in your guaranteed analysis. So that may also result in some different things being in the guaranteed analysis in some, for some feeds than others.
There's so much information in this part. Can you explain some of this in more detail? Like, what does crude protein and crude fat and crude fiber mean?
Yeah, so the word crude, I think is perhaps what you're getting at, like why are they called crude, whatever. And it is because those values are calculated values, right? So you're not actually, so for example, in the case of protein, we're actually measuring the amount of nitrogen in that feed. And then we're making an assumption, and we're saying that, nitrogen makes up like 6.25% of most proteins. And so from there, we extrapolate and come up with our percent protein. So, there's an opportunity for quite a lot of error in there. There's a lot of assumptions being made, and, that may or may not be accurate. I mean, we feel they're fairly accurate, but these are calculated values. We're not actually really doing the test on them to know exactly what they are. So they're sort of best estimates based on calculation. So they are crude definitions, crude, calculations of protein, fat, and fiber. So that's what those things mean. And obviously, fiber is a carbohydrate fraction. It's part of your structural carbohydrate fraction. So it's just kind of giving you an idea of that. And you can Obviously the higher fat is a very energy dense ingredient. So, if your fat is high, you can make the assumption it's going to be a high calorie feed. If your fiber is really low, traditionally, if you were like, okay, so most of the raw ingredients, alfalfa meal, oats, like those kinds of ingredients have a relatively low fat, 3% fat. So if you've got even 5 or 6% fat, you've probably got a little bit of added fat coming from, say, rice bran, maybe a little bit of oil. If you've got a feed that's 10, 12% fat, you've got a lot of fat, probably a lot of oil being added. That's going to be a high calorie feed. If you have a low fat, so let's say 4, 5, 6% fat, and your fiber is low, 8, 10% fiber. Now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this is going to have probably quite a lot of starch in it, especially if it's a performance feed, because where else are those calories for that performance horse coming from? Then I can go look at the ingredient list. I'm going to expect to see a lot of grain type ingredients up front in the ingredient list, and we'll talk about ingredient lists in a minute. So you can use these, the crude fat, protein, fiber, to kind of give you a sense of where are the calories in this, where do I think the calories in this feed are going to be coming from? And then you can go look at the ingredient list and go, yep, that was right. I guessed correctly, kind of thing.
And this is always fun when you're looking at the bag, that some of the nutrients are guaranteed as minimums, while other ones are maximums. Why aren't these values exact?
Yeah, so they are mainly because you've got variation in ingredients that are going in. So, you're going to have natural variation, say, in the calcium content of the alfalfa meal that's going in there. So you're right. There are going to be things that are guaranteed in minimum and maximum amounts. And I think before we talk about why they're mins and maxes, it's interesting to note which nutrients are minimums and which are maximums. So, for example, crude protein is going to be a minimum. Crude fat is going to be a minimum. Crude fiber is going to be a maximum. NDF and ADF also have to be on horse feeds. These are components of their types of fiber, types of carbohydrate, and those also have to be maximums. So the easiest way to look at this is to say, well, protein ingredients tend to be, more expensive. Your fat sources tend to be more expensive. High fiber ingredients, generally cheaper, easier to get hold of, generally cheaper ingredients. So if you had a maximum protein, let's say we guaranteed 14% max protein, the feed manufacturer could put in, 4% protein. And it would still be, it would be okay because it's under that maximum. So we don't want that to happen, right? We want to know there really is 12%, 14%, whatever it is, that's in there. So we make that a minimum. And because protein is pretty expensive, it's unusual. If you have a minimum crude protein of 14%, I would be very surprised if that feed had, say, 20% protein, because that would be, that you'd then be spending money on ingredients that you don't need to, and it's just not good economics, right? So the chances are a feed with a crude protein of like 14% might have 15, 16% protein in it, but you're definitely going to get a minimum of 14. You won't get a ton more than that. The same applies to maximum fiber, is that if we had minimum fiber of, say, 20%, well, the feed could have 40% fiber in it, and then it might not be super digestible. So again, we have a maximum fiber to, prevent that from happening. So that's, that's why we have differing mins and maxes. You'll see I think I talked about chromium before. Chromium is, if it's guaranteed, it's typically guaranteed as a maximum, because there are regulations about how much total chromium the horse can have in its diet per day. So again, we want to guarantee that as a maximum. And then, there's always going to be a little bit of fluctuation in the actual amounts of these things, the actual amount of zinc, the actual amount of calcium, because some of the ingredients that are being put in there, they're natural ingredients. They're alfalfa, they're oats, they're, wheat, they're, rice bran. Like these are plant-based products. They have natural variation depending on what field the plant grew in and what the soil was like there, or what what harvest year it is. And so there has to be some allowance of variance. So regulators want to protect you as a consumer, that at a minimum you'll know you have this in the feed. So all of your minerals are typically, and vitamins are typically guaranteed as a minimum, so you have that peace of mind of knowing that that minimum is in there. But there will be a small amount of fluctuation. There'll be a small amount of overage, depending on natural fluctuation in the product. And it's very hard to really pin down ton after ton after ton after feed and say, yeah, every time it is exactly 200 milligrams of zinc per pound. Like, that would be really hard to achieve.
Right. I don't think I've ever seen calorie value on a feed tag. Why is that not included?
Yeah, it's not generally put on a feed tag. And part of the reason for that is that we don't have, it's another one of those kind of crude calculated values. There are different ways you can calculate calories. There are different equations out there. Different people use different equations. And so because it's really not a standardized thing, we don't put it on the bag, because, if I calculate calories one way and you calculate it differently, then there's no industry standard, is my point. So we don't tend to put that on the bag. You will sometimes find that information on websites, and certainly companies should be able to give you that information if you phone them. They should be able to give you the expected calorie content of that feed, but it's not on horse feeds yet. It did recently make its way, and my sense of time is terrible, so maybe 5 years, I don't know when I say recent, but recently make its way onto cat food and dog food. It was passed as a requirement, in part because of the obesity issues we were seeing in pets. So it has, AFCO has moved to, and states have moved to having that on pet food, but it's not made its way onto horse food yet.
Are there any general assumptions I can make from all these values?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at, for example, copper, and it's a feed that's got a copper content of like 30 parts per million, 50 parts per million, I'm going to expect that feed has a pretty large serving size. That's probably could be a complete feed where I could feed that and nothing else. It maybe has I'm going to think it's going to have a larger, probably 6+ pounds per day to an average size horse type feeding size, just because those values are quite low. And so that's always a bit of a tell for me, because if then I go and look at that feed and the manufacturers are telling me, oh no, you only have to, you can just feed, 2 or 3 pounds. I'm like, well, that's not going to work, because this is not fortified enough to ensure that the horse's nutrient needs are met at that feeding level. So it's one of the ways that I judge sort of like quality, in inverted commas. It's one marker of quality of a feed is, is the concentration of nutrients in this feed, does it match the feeding directions? And that's maybe something that, the average consumer might find a little difficult to do, because you kind of have to know what the requirements are to do that. But as I mentioned before, using the fiber, fat percentages, you can start, making some inferences about, is this going to be, if the fiber level is really low, I'm expecting that to be a higher starch type feed. You can start to kind of make some assumptions about the type of feed you're looking at from these values.
I know that from looking at the back of bags and looking at the guaranteed analysis, some of the guaranteed analyses are longer than other ones. Why is it that some companies have more items or things in it than others do?
That they're guaranteeing more nutrients. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there is this sort of minimum number of things companies have to guarantee, and then beyond that, it's their personal preference. The more, obviously, the more things you guarantee, the harder it is to kind of make that feed, because you have more constraints that you're having to hit as you put that feed together, if that makes sense. So those feeds are perhaps a little more rigid And some companies, don't want to have that rigidity in their, formula or what have you. It's, potentially, you may have to add, if you're guaranteeing, for example, your, I don't know, iodine or something, then, you've got to make sure you hit that all the time. So you have to, there's a little bit more money involved there in making sure you do that all the time. But it really comes down to the preference of the company. And I think some, companies realize that they have a customer base that is discerning and wants to know what's in their feed. And so they're trying to be transparent with their customers and share as much information as possible. Other companies know that their customer base perhaps isn't so worried about that kind of thing, right? And so they don't, that's not as important to their customers. And so they don't need to worry about having all that information on the bag.
How can I use this information to compare different products?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of where tag wars kind of start, right? Is that you start looking and kind of going, well, that one has more zinc than that one. It must be better. Or it gets a little tricky. And I can say, as somebody who formulates feed, it's tricky because I know that this is what consumers are doing, right? I know that they're going out and they're going to look and say, well, this feed has, 200 parts per million of zinc, and this one over here has 250 parts per million of zinc, so it must be better, even though, the one that has 2 million parts per million zinc would meet their horse's requirement if they feed the feeding directions, or, it's 200 parts per million and it's using really, more bioavailable chelated trace minerals versus the one that has 250 parts per million is using, sulfates and oxides that maybe not as bioavailable. So that's why there's more in there. It's tricky, right? Because I get that these are the things I look at when I'm looking at guaranteed analyses, and then I go and look at the ingredient list to see, well, where are these numbers coming from? What are the sources of these nutrients? And that's how I start to really kind of hone in and narrow down my decision. But I realize that for a lot of people, horse owners, it's hard to do that. You kind of have to have you have to have an appreciation of different types of ingredients and what your horse really needs. And that is one of the benefits of working with a nutritionist, is that's what we do. We do all that for you. But generally speaking, as the nutrient levels go up, the guaranteed values get higher, I'm expecting that the feeding directions for that feed should get lower, right? So, for example, a ration balancer might have a guarantee of, 750, 1,000 parts per million zinc, whereas a performance feed might have, 175, 250 parts per million zinc. So it does, again, if I'm looking down this, I'm thinking, right, I'm going to expect to see my zinc inclusion is pretty low. I'm going to expect to see a high feeding rate. If when I then get to the feeding directions, the feeding rate isn't high, then I'm like, what's going on here? Like, because am I really going to meet my horse's needs off of this feed? It doesn't look very well fortified, right? That kind of a thing. So for me, it just helps me. All the parts of the tag need to stack up and tell the same story, right? And if they don't, if there's sort of like dissonance between the sections on the feed tag, and one thing's saying this should have a high feeding rate, and then another part, the feeding rate isn't that high, then I start to kind of go, I start losing faith in the product. And honestly, I'll start losing faith in the company that made it, because I start to wonder who put this together and do they really know what they're doing?
Just so I understand, I think I understand. If the number is lower, it should have a higher feeding direction. If the number's higher,
expect it to, yes.
If the number's higher, so if we think about a balancer where you feed 1 pound a day, the number would be higher. But if we think about a senior, the number would be lower because you're feeding 6 pounds of it. Right? Does that make sense? Did I understand that correctly?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can, we can find an example to pull
That's
up.
Okay. I just wanted to break it down because it was just like, it was a lot to say. Yeah. And I think when people are listening, like having like a real world kind of just like, I think that's really what you're saying. So when you're looking at the numbers, if the numbers are
Right.
high, the feeding rate's lower. If the numbers are low, the feeding rate should be higher. Okay.
Yeah. So like, for example, right now I've got Safe Choice Senior open on my screen, right? Safe Choice Senior has a zinc of 140 parts per million and a copper of 40 parts per million. If I go to their feeding directions, they've got a, hang on, I'm going to put this 1,200 pound horse at maintenance, not doing anything. I have to feed 18 to 21 pounds per day.
Whoa.
Right. Right. So that's because it's a complete feed. So they're expecting you to feed that and nothing else, right? So the guaranteed analysis on that product is 40 parts per million copper, 140 parts per million zinc for a 1,200 pound horse in light work. The feeding recommendations are 18 to 21 pounds, right? If I go to, let me just pull up, see if I can find their balancer. So they have a balancer. And I'll just pull it up. Here we go. So in this product, the guaranteed analysis, this is their balancer. The copper, 250 parts per million. And the zinc is 750 parts per million. If I go to the feeding directions and I say my 1,200 pound horse maintenance layup, it's a 1 to, unfortunately, their website cuts off the second column of numbers for 1,200 pound horse, but you can see my point, right?
Yeah.
We've got a 1
substantially less
to like substantially less because it's way more fortified.
Right. Okay, let's move on to the ingredients list. And this can be really long, and honestly, I sometimes look at it. But if I do look at it, I'm only looking at the first 4 or 5 things. I'm not reading through till the end. I don't care that much. So is that bad? Should I be looking past 4 or 5 ingredients if I look at all?
I don't think you're alone there, right? I mean, I run into a couple of different kinds of folks when it comes to the ingredient list, right? There are those folks who are wanting to avoid specific ingredients. Maybe they don't want whole grains, or they, their horse, they believe their horse has an allergy to a specific ingredient, right? These owners are going to read the ingredient list quite diligently all the way down, right? To make sure that their, demon ingredient is not in the product, right? Other folks like yourself, you're probably going to give it a quick scan, right? You're going to quick scan, and as long as nothing leaps out to you in the first 5 or 6 ingredients, there's nothing there that you weren't expecting, you're going to move on, and you're done, right? But there's so much more.
Like what? What else is there?
So to start with, I think it's important to understand that ingredients are typically listed in descending order of inclusion by weight.
Okay, so there's more of the first ingredient in the feed than the second, than the third, than the fourth. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's the general rule. But in horse feed, it's not absolutely 100% true all the time. So, for example, vitamins and minerals that are in commercial feeds are often in something that's called a premix, meaning that they're manufactured into a blend beforehand. Like, so all your trace minerals, like your macro minerals, your vitamin E, D, B, your pre-probiotics, oftentimes these are blended into a mix separate to the feed. And then this is added to the feed at a specific amount to get the concentration of minerals and vitamins needed in that particular feed. So let's say the premix is added at, 20 pounds per ton. And it's the 5th heaviest thing to be added, right? And the premix is made up of 10 ingredients. The next ingredient is flaxseed meal, and it's added at 19 pounds per ton. Often what happens is that all of the 10 ingredients that were in that premix will be added starting at the 5th position, right? So the first ingredient of the 10 in the premix will be number 5 on the finished product. The second ingredient of the 10 in the premix will be ingredient number 6 in the finished product, all the way down, and then flax will be added after those 10, right? However, the reality is that none of the 10 ingredients in that premix were in that premix at 19 pounds. And so really the flax seeds should have been added as a 5th ingredient if you were really sticking to the decreasing order of inclusion, but they weren't. The other thing...
that's like a lot, like too much for my brain. I get it. I understand what you're saying, and I understand the right way and why it's the right way. But yeah, that's really getting into the nitty-gritty.
It is. And when I put, I'm a bit of a stickler for actually putting ingredients in their actual decreasing order of inclusion when I work on products. It's one of my things that's important to me.
What else should we be looking for when we're looking at the ingredients list? Moving on. Next.
I just want to say,
okay,
it's kind of just jumping back to the last bit about molasses, because people get really wound up about molasses.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, they do.
So yes, right. People really, they look at something and they're like, oh my gosh, molasses is the 3rd ingredient. It's got so much molasses in this feed. Remember, it's decreasing order by weight. The molasses is heavy, but it's mostly water. It's mostly liquid. It's water, right? There's not the sugar that's in the molasses is, if you evaporated out all that water, that's not solid sugar is my point, right? So Oftentimes molasses ends up being high on the ingredient list, but it's not actually contributing that much sugar. Hopefully that makes sense to people. And so don't freak out. Like if you're looking for a low starch, low sugar, low NSC feed, and you see molasses as, 3rd, 4th ingredient, that feed can still have an NSC of less than 10%, right? Because there's a lot of water weight in there and it's not actually contributing that much sugar, even though it's like high up on the ingredient list. So if you see it there and go, oh, that's really high up and I need a low sugar feed, don't just write the feed off because of that. Go digging and find out what the sugar content actually is. You may be surprised. I know a number of feeds that have NSC values of 12% or less, and sugar is like the 3rd ingredient. Molasses is the 3rd ingredient, sorry.
Because molasses weighs more than oats, right?
Well, a pound of molasses and a pound of oats weighs the same thing. It's just liquid.
Trying to think of something light in it. When I think of oats, I think like if you had a scoop of oats, they're so light. Okay, never mind. Main thing is it's done by weight. And molasses are heavy.
Right.
Yes, I got it.
They're water, So
I think
to
that's
your point about oats.
Go ahead.
Well, like a pound of oats is mostly dry material. They're not liquid. Whereas a pound of molasses is nearly all liquid. It's not an equal, but they both weigh a pound.
Right.
But the amount
I think that's a really good point to bring up, though, because a lot of people do see it and they just think sugar and they think that it's going to be, not a good choice. So I think that it's good that you brought that up.
Yeah, it's like grass versus hay, right? There's a lot more water in grass than there is in hay, even though, so it's a similar kind of deal. So, yeah.
Okay.
So you had asked the question, what else are we looking for?
Right. In that ingredient list, what else are we looking for?
So, the main ingredient of those, so generally speaking, those first 5 or 6 ingredients, those are going to be, like your alfalfa meal, your rice bran, your oats, your wheat midge, your distillers dried grains, all the things that are actually their main job is to provide protein, carbohydrate, fiber, fat, right? That's where the majority of your protein and energy is coming from. And then we get into the weeds a little bit with that, premix pack that's been put in there with all the vitamins and minerals. And, if you really know what you're looking at, you can start to look at, okay, so it's got zinc in it, but what kind of zinc? Is it zinc sulfate? Is it zinc oxide? Is it zinc proteinate? Is it zinc amino acid complex? And sulfates and oxides are what we call inorganic. They are kind of like as they came out of the ground, right? There's no carbon containing, organic compound associated with them. An organic trace mineral is not, as many people think, a USDA organic ingredient, although it might be certified and approved for use in organic feed. When we say organic minerals, we're talking about these are minerals that have been piggybacked onto something with a carbon molecule. So they've been piggybacked onto a protein, or piggybacked onto an amino acid, or piggybacked onto a carbohydrate. And they're generally going to be more available to your horse than when they're in the sulfate and oxide form. And they cost more, right? So when you start buying feeds that are premium or more expensive, look at your ingredient list. You should expect to see some of those proteinates, amino acid complexes, trace minerals, your copper, your zinc, your manganese, selenium. Selenium yeast, for example, is organic. Sodium selenite is inorganic, right? This is what starts to make your feed cost more, but it is also going to work better in your horse, most likely. It's going to be, those ingredients are going to be more bioavailable. So that's what I start looking for as well. I also look for things like collective feed terms. So you might have a feed that has, plant protein products as an ingredient. And you're like, what the heck is that? Well, there are, and I should have looked up the actual number before we started recording today, but let's just go with 20 different plant sources that are approved to be plant protein products. And when a feed company puts plant protein products on their ingredient list, they are allowed to use any of those 20 ingredients that are classified as a plant protein product in that feed, in that space. So it means the ingredient can change. And what's going to cause it to change is most likely the cost of the ingredient in the marketplace, or potentially the nutrient profile they need to get in that feed is no longer being met by, say, alfalfa meal, and would be better met by, something else. So they're going to put the something else in place of alfalfa. So it means that feed, the ingredients in that feed can change. It's probably not changing super frequently, but it can change. So if that matters to you, if you have a horse that's sensitive and, you don't want the ingredients switching in and out, then you don't want to be feeding a feed that uses collective feed terms, right? And so generally, we think of feeds that use collective feed terms. We call those least cost formulated feeds. So generally, the formulators are going to be looking for, these are more your budget feeds. They're going to be feeds where the formulators are trying to keep costs down and will substitute in ingredients based on the market. Or they may be fixed nutrient feeds where they're saying we have to hit a copper of this and we have to hit a zinc of that. And doesn't really matter so much how we get there with the ingredients. Maybe this batch of alfalfa has a better copper profile than this batch of Timothy this month, so we'll switch them out, versus fixed formula feeds where they are specifically stating the exact ingredient on the feed tag. And so that ingredient is the one that's going to be in there every single time. And those feeds are going to be probably more expensive because the cost of ingredients changes all the time. And if oats go up X amount per ton, they can't switch to something else because they've told you they're going to put oats in it. And so you may pay for that. But that can be a really good thing if you want to know that every time you open a bag, it's the same ingredients that are in there, right? So that's a fixed, these are little hints that you get, when you look at, you wouldn't know that if you didn't look at the ingredient list in some detail. What else would you find out? Oh, you can look for probiotics and see if you can see probiotics in the ingredient list. You might see things like Aspergillus oryzae or Lactobacillus species or Enterococcus faecium. These are names of bacteria. And if you see them in the ingredient list, are they guaranteeing them? Did they call them out on the guaranteed analysis? Did they have a collective guarantee for direct fed microbials? Because if not, then the amount of these probiotics in that feed probably aren't enough to do much, right? Because if they were, you'd sing and dance about it and put it all over the bag. And then another thing you can look for is the vitamin E source. Is it a natural vitamin E? Is it a synthetic vitamin E? I used to be really into making it sure that it was wanting a natural vitamin E. I'm not so excited about that anymore because honestly, I've shifted my thinking a little bit. I'm going to recommend my clients test their horses' vitamin E levels, regardless of whether their feed has natural or synthetic vitamin E in it. And then based on those test results, we're going to determine if we need a supplemental form of vitamin E in the diet. I think people can get falsely comfortable thinking, oh, my feed has natural vitamin E in it, so my horse's vitamin E needs are going to be met. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, you could be providing 1,000, 1,500 IUs of natural vitamin E in your horse's feed, and your horse can still be deficient. So, and natural vitamin E is much more expensive. So I've kind of shifted towards, it's nice, right, to have natural vitamin E, but it's not a deal breaker for me anymore, right? I'm okay with feeds using synthetic vitamin E. Because I'm going to tell you either way, you're going to need to test your horse, and we'll supplement as needed. So those are some of the things that I'm looking for in an ingredient list, in more detail than perhaps folks are when they're at the feed store trying to pick a feed.
Are there any rules around what you can call an ingredient? Like, for example, can a manufacturer say an ingredient is human grade? And are there any other callouts that we might see in an ingredients list?
You cannot say it's human grade. Nope. So, there are very specific terms that people might be surprised. There are a very specific list of approved ingredients for use in feed. And if it's not an approved ingredient for use in feed, you can't put it in feed. And there are some exceptions where you can, and I think there's some shift happening to allow, for example, like it used to be if you put glucosamine and chondroitin in feed, it was what's called an adulterated feed. I think that's been loosened up a little bit recently. But yes, very specific rules about how things have to be called. Like, for example, alfalfa meal, it could be dehydrated, it could be dried in the sun. Like, you're supposed to say whether it's sun cured or dehydrated. I mean, it's really specific. There's a lot of rules about how things get labeled. One thing you might see especially in the West Coast, if you have feed that's going into California and it has soy hulls in it, you are required to put the maximum percentage of soy hulls that are in that feed in the ingredient list. So it'll say something like soybean hulls, parentheses, max 10%. And that is a requirement. It's kind of an unfortunate requirement, I think. It's required because California believes that soy hulls are not a particularly useful source of fiber, and they're not in pigs. It's based on pigs, and it's they have not made that so differentiated between species. But pigs don't have a very big colon and don't have a very large microbial fermentation vat. So yeah, okay, like they don't have a method by which to utilize soy hulls very well. The irony is that soy hulls are an amazing source of fermentable fiber to horses, the same way that beet pulp is. It's an excellent ingredient for horses. It's not a filler at all. But the regulations are there; they have to be followed. If you have feed going into California, you're supposed to have the percentage of soy hulls called out in your ingredient list.
Okay. Next on the tag are the feeding directions. And these can vary quite a bit between different feeds.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that example we just called out earlier, right? Where the senior feed had an 18 to 21 pounds and the balancer had a pound. But yeah, and there's no standardized way of doing this. So you just have to have them on there. So sometimes you're going to say, you see, things like feed 0.1 to 0.3 pounds per 100 pounds of body weight. I mean, now you got to do math, right? So,
And you have to
first
know
of all,
how
you have to
much
know
your
how.
horse weighs.
I think we have an episode on that.
We sure do.
So, yes, you do have to know how much your horse weighs. So you need to, and you have to be able to do basic, like second grade math, and know that if your horse weighs 1,000 pounds, that's 10 100-pound increments. So when they say feed zero point 0.1 to 0.3 pounds per 100-pound body weight, you have to multiply 0.1 by 10 or 0.3 by 10 to figure out how many pounds you have to feed your horse. Others are just going to say, they'll just say, like the ones we read earlier, 1,200-pound horse, feed this many pounds. Right? They've done that for you. Others are just going to say, feed this amount and work up and down, but don't feed less than this. I mean, they're all over the board. So yeah, there's no standardization in how feeding directions get laid out. The regulators just require that some form of feeding direction be on there.
And the last bit of information on the bag, which I don't think gets looked at very often, is the weight of the feed and the contact info for the manufacturer or the company.
Yeah, I don't think people think about the weight very much at all, but it can make a huge difference. So they do have to say the net weight of the bag. And if you want to figure out the cost per pound or like your cost per day of your feed in your program, then you need to know how many pounds there are in the bag. And most feeds in the US are sold in 50-pound bags. Some are in 40-pound bags. So I know, there are some of our major feed companies in the US put the majority of their feeds in 50-pound bags, but sneakily put their balances in 40-pound bags. But the bag is the same size. So if you don't actually look at the fine print, you just go, well, that's the same size bag as everything else on the shelf. So I just bought a 50-pound bag of feed. No, you didn't. You bought a 40-pound bag of feed. Similarly, a lot of the feed coming over from Europe, because they work in kilos, it's not a 50-pound bag either. They're often, I want to say, like 44-pound bags, 40-pound bags, like they're less. And so this is, going to make a big difference. I mean, if you do your cost per day and divide it by, the cost of your bag by 50 to get a price per pound, but in actual fact it's 40, that makes a big difference. So I've seen people buy the cheaper feed because on a per bag basis it was cheaper. However, when you look at the feeding directions, that feed often has a larger serving requirement. And when you do the math to figure out the cost per day, the feed's actually more expensive per bag. The feed that's more expensive per bag may actually be cheaper on a per day basis for your horse. So I think that's really important. And then briefly, like the contact information, I don't think we spent any time thinking about that. But if there's ever a recall or a problem with your feed, that information is vital so that you can, get back to know how to reach the manufacturer.
Right. I think the bag weight is the part that most owners miss. And
yeah.
I'm going to use Balancer as an example because that's what I feed. So I feed Triple Crown Balancer, and the feeding instructions are 1,000 pound for a 1,000-pound horse are 0.75 to 1 pound per day. So it's a 50-pound bag, and I pay $43 at my local feed store. So if I feed 1 pound a day, there's 50 servings in that bag for a 1,000-pound horse, and that's 86 cents a day. And then I was talking to the High Gain rep about their recommended feed for my pony, and the feed they recommended to me, the feed rate was 2.5 pounds to 4 pounds a day for a 1,000-pound horse. And their bag's 44 pounds, and it's $59. And that was on Chewy. I can't get it at my local feed store. If I feed the low end of that, 2.5 pounds per day, there's 17.5 servings in that bag. And it's $2.56 a day. From 86 cents with my Triple Crown to $2.56. And I'm only getting, it's not even a full month's worth of food. Whereas with my Triple Crown one, I'm getting 50 servings out of it. And that doesn't even go into whether or not they're comparable products off their guaranteed analysis. And I'm not going to get into that. But I I do see this on social media a lot. People asking for the best and the cheapest option, and people throwing out product names. And because, like, you and I look at look at bags and labels frequently, and we know a lot of the products on the market. I know a lot of the products being recommended do not offer the best guarantee analysis, and they don't offer the best price either. But people, like, that's what happens when you go to social media asking what you should feed, right? You've got to do this research, especially like that's for one horse. So think if I had 5 horses at $2.56 a day, like that's madness. I think it's, I mean, I know
absolutely.
I think it's madness. Maybe it's not. Is there anything else that needs to be on the bag?
Caution statements. You're supposed to have, there needs to be caution statements. There's sometimes you'll get a caution statement around copper. So copper is toxic to sheep. So you'll sometimes see a caution statement about don't feed your horse feed to sheep. If you have added selenium, like there's sometimes a selenium statement about not feeding more than 0.3 parts per million of selenium in the total diet, not what's in that feed, but when you if you're feeding hay as well, like in the total diet, the concentration of selenium should not be more than 0.3 parts per million. If it's got chromium in it and they're guaranteeing the chromium, then you'll see a chromium caution statement as well. About the fact that you should not feed more than 4 milligrams per head per day of chromium. So you'll sometimes see those caution statements on bags or tags as well.
There seems to be way more information on the bag than what we just talked about. Like, what is all the other information that's out there?
I know, there's always so many like pretty buttons and things and sometimes pictures and like all of it's marketing, right? To make you feel good about the feed. But it does also help you determine if that feed might be a good choice for your horse. So, you might see call outs. You might see call outs about, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of some feeds off the top of my head. Maybe it has something like, marine-derived calcium in it to buffer the stomach acid. There might be a call out for that, or a little button type thing. Or, maybe they've got some special technology that they've branded in their feed, and they'll put a little shield or whatever the logo is for that. That'll be on the bag, with this technology or whatever. Those things will be cool. And again, it's marketing, right? But those sorts of things, they'll often be on the bag as well.
What about the special ingredients companies have in their feeds? Like some of the ones I can think of are Gutwise, Uptake Technology, Equimix, Digestive Shield. What is this?
They're basically they're typically trademarked names, collective names for a series of ingredients that company has, a proprietary blend of ingredients that company has put together. It's like that company's secret sauce, right? It's the thing that, it's the bells and whistles that they believe makes their feed tick and stand out from others on the market. Again, they're all snappy titles, right? Like Gutwise, or it speaks to what it does a little bit. You think, oh, that's got to be something to do with the gut, but the reality is that many of these branded terms, they may actually have the same ingredients in them. They're from different ingredient manufacturers, but they've labeled the specific combination and amounts that they're using in their feed with this trademarked title. But it's possible that the type of Saccharomyces cerevisiae in one of these products is the exact same as in a different feed company's products. They're just calling it something else under their umbrella. They've mixed it with 4 other things, and under their umbrella, it's something special to them and it's proprietary and it's better than everybody else's, and they've branded it and labeled it with this trademark term, right? So I think that's what people perhaps don't always understand, is that the ingredients in these things may be the same, but the amounts can be very different, right? And And are they actually guaranteeing the things that are in these secret sources in your guaranteed analysis? Because it's one thing to have a secret source that you've branded and is proprietary, but are you kind of putting your money where your mouth is? Like, are you guaranteeing the consumer is going to get X amount of something that's in your secret source? Because otherwise, it's all hot air.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Like, I know a lot of feed companies now advertise probiotics on the bag. You kind of see that in like the little bubble in the corner, like with probiotics. Like, is there a certain number that should be on the bag to actually make the probiotic in the bag effective? What should people be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, research suggests that to really have an effect on the horse's digestive tract, you probably need values in the billions per pound of that feed, right? And again, I see manufacturers that they guarantee their probiotic components in a couple of ways. Like I mentioned earlier, they either combine them all together and say total direct fed microbials and give you a number, X million per and it's often done in 10 to the 6 million per pound or something, right? And I don't know, I hate those sorts of numbers. They make my head spin, right? So I look at it and go, wow, that's a big number. But it needs to be billions. And we need to be doing things in billions to really be effective. And some of the companies will actually pull out specific strains. So maybe they'll say, Bacillus subtilis, and they'll actually give an actual amount of Bacillus subtilis or Lactobacillus acidophilus and an actual amount of that. And then the direct fed microbial value, if they give one, is all those things added together, right? Is the total. Some just give the total without telling you the individual strains. And some say they've got probiotics in it, but they don't guarantee them at all. So like I said earlier, I mean, if they don't guarantee them, they're probably not in there in an amount that's really doing anything, because these things cost money. And if you had them in there at a sort of viable amount to do something, why wouldn't you be telling the consumers what that is? So to me, that's an immediate, I don't think it's really in there. It's what we call tag dressing. It's in there. It's in the ingredient list. But you're not going to tell me how much, then I don't believe you.
Right. I notice a lot of feeds have adjectives in their product names. I think it's kind of funny with my sales background. Like, I see the marketing ploy behind it, but I think it's worth pointing out that these are just marketing and designed to lead you to a purchase. And just because it has a word in the title, it doesn't mean it's actually going to fix your horse's problem. They may even be just misleading you, right?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I don't think they mean to mislead you, but yeah, you're 100% correct. I mean, they don't. Yeah, they're marketing.
Right. Some feed product companies are pretty explanatory. Like when you look on the bag, complete, growth, light, low starch. And then if you go on like another feed company, there's names like Resolve, Calm Performer, Synergize. Like, what does that even mean? Synergize? Like, I don't get the reference to my horse. Are we going to have synergy together if I feed this? Like, anyway, I just like those to me make it seem like they're trying to have you solve, like this feed is going to solve a problem. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Calm Performer makes me think that my agitated, on edge, lucky dressage horse is going to come out and just be completely focused on me and be on my every aid, right? I mean, that's what it's suggesting, right? But like, how is it going to do that? Right? Like, I mean, it's what I would expect from that name. I would expect that that's going to be a lower starch, higher fat feed. Maybe it's got some, I don't know, gut health components in it. I don't know, but the name it's promising me something. I don't know if it's going to deliver. And to your point, synergy with what? Synergy, and I'm a nutritionist, synergy in the hindgut? I don't know, right? Synergy with the rider, to your point. I mean, you interpret that as, something between you and your horse. I look at it and think, maybe they mean the bugs in the hindgut. But I don't know. So then you're right. There are others that have, growth. That's pretty straight up and down. That's clearly a growth feed, right? But even something like low starch is a good one to talk about, right? Because low starch, I mean, that suggests it's got low starch. And it's easier as a consumer to go, okay, great, that's going to be a really good choice for my metabolic, horse that needs a low NSC diet. But not necessarily, right? They've told you the starch is low. How low? Right? Because, corn has a starch of over 70%. Oats have a starch of over 40%. So this could have a starch of 25% and still be calling itself low starch. Not appropriate for your IR metabolic low NSC, diet horse. I will say, for example, I think low starch is a name that I can think of a couple of feeds called low starch, but for example, Triple Crown's low starch is 9.9% starch. That is low starch. But then you have to consider the sugar in it, and the overall NSC of that feed is 15%. Light, that's another Triple Crown feed. That is, what do you think when you hear the term light? What does that mean to you?
You're asking me when I see it light?
I am. Yeah. What does that mean to you?
It means that I can feed that to my fat ponies. That's the way I would take that it's going to be safe.
Right. Well, it's light, right? It's kind of low on calories, right? It is. Yeah. It's a light
Right.
option. And actually, in this case, it is, right? It's a 10% NSC feed. It's that step between a balancer and a performance feed, because the feeding range on that feed is 2 to 4 pounds for an average size horse, right? So that's twice as much as a balancer, but it's not as much as most performance feeds that start off at around 6. So it's that light intake. It's a lower intake, and it is also light in calories and happens to be low NSC. So it is kind of like the light calorie feed, but it's a slightly bigger serving size than balancer. And then I think the classic one I think I alluded to before was when Safe Choice first came out, there was one form of it, and people thought that it was a safe choice for their metabolic horses. I actually had a vet working with a laminitic horse who put it on 15 pounds of Safe Choice a day because he thought that would be better than the untested grass hay that they were feeding, and was completely unaware that the NSC of that feed was 20%. And that actually you're not supposed to feed that much of it. It's not a complete feed. It wasn't a complete feed. You couldn't feed that much. But the name, he fell for the name, right? He got the name and he thought, Safe Choice. This is
Sounds like a safe choice.
meant to be, right? It's clearly meant to be for horses that are insulin dysregulated. So I think the point to be made here is you have to go digging beyond the names. Right, yeah. Because there aren't actually in horse feed, there are not regulations over the terms you can use. And I've forgotten, because it's been a long time since I've heard her lecture, but I have a dear friend who is a PhD veterinary nutritionist in the pet space, and she used to give a wonderful lecture to my animal nutrition students. Shout out to Dr. Jennifer Larson. And Jen used to, explain that in the pet food space, the terms that are used to describe pet food actually there are rules. So if it says something like beef dinner, then there's supposed to be X amount of beef in that product, right? It's actually fascinating. And I think, again, most of us don't realize this, but there are very strict rules about how pet foods get named and how that then relates to what's in that pet food. That's not the case in the equine space. if you make a claim, like, for example, if you say something is, I don't know, like low starch, then you do have to guarantee the starch that's in there. But otherwise, light, you're not, again, that's a very clever word. It sort of gets around that requirement. Like, you don't actually then have to, you haven't made a direct claim about the level of starch and sugar in that feed, so you wouldn't have to guarantee the starch and sugar in that feed. So just be careful when it comes to names. Don't make assumptions.
Well, this is another one with names. Like, we did the whole episode a couple episodes ago on forage-based diet trend. And
Yeah.
there's quite a few companies now using those buzzwords: whole foods feed, carb guard, forage first. Like, what do you think about that? Do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's marketing again to appeal to a certain demographic of people, right? Whole foods feed really speaks to people where the sort of like farm to fork type whole foods, non-processed type ingredients matters to them, right? So it is, again, the name, again, it's marketing.
Right.
It doesn't mean to say that the nutrition in that feed is superior. It doesn't mean to say that the feed will meet your horse's nutrient needs. It doesn't, say anything about whether the feed is cost effective. None of that, right? But we fall for these names because they evoke an emotion in us.
And this is why we're supposed to be looking at the guaranteed analysis and the ingredients.
Right.
Isn't
No,
that the whole
absolutely.
point?
Yeah.
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 So the other thing,
that's how you cut through the marketing. Yeah, absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
There are a lot of products coming on the market from other countries. And when I see these products, I'm pretty tempted to try them because they're interesting and they're new and shiny and bright and, all those other things. But a lot of them are muesli type mixes. Like,
yeah.
A lot of companies in the US aren't making muesli type mixes. And
right.
If somebody was considering one of these, is there something specific that they should be looking for with these feeds on these bags? And I guess what I mean is not so much the type of feed, but feeds that are from other countries.
Yeah, I mean, they're very attractive, right? I mean, I grew up in the UK with these sorts of feeds. Were fairly popular. They're really nice to look at, right? They look like the sort of thing you'd put in your own breakfast bowl, minus perhaps the bits of hay.
Right.
But they're very attractive. So I can see the appeal in them. They also tend to put like a lot of herbs and things in them too, so they often smell really good. But you will probably find some ingredients that we don't typically see here. Like, so I think, like a lot of lupins and, munga beans and like, these kinds of things that you're like, nobody in the US is putting that in a US manufactured feed, right? These are not common feed ingredients. So you may see some ingredients that you're just like, what is that? That are very common in other parts of the world, especially like Australia and the like. You may find that their bags, if they're just using the bags that they use in their home country, they may not actually comply to US feed regulations, right? You may find that they don't have the same, like the ingredient lists look different, how they're on the bag. You may find that they don't guarantee nearly as much as we do tend to in the US, especially among the national retailers or national feed companies. So there are some differences that you will see, and the bags tend to be smaller because they tend to work on kilo bases, and it's like 20 kilos, so they're not 50-pound bags most of the time, and you're paying a premium because they've been shipped halfway across the world. So if food miles is a thing for you, I think sometimes we forget because we go pick it up at our feed store, or, Chewy delivers it or whatever. But if it matters to you where your horse's feed comes from, and if, you're somebody in your house that worries about food miles, the food miles on these things can be vast.
Right. And the purpose of our podcast, originally, like why we started this, is to give listeners the tools to make informed decisions on how to feed their horses. So, like the next time you go to your barn, or if you're online, take a look at your current feed bag and the feed instructions. Like, are you actually feeding your current feed properly? And if you need to change feeds, do your own research, like to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your horse, that you're getting them the correct feed and the correct amount.
Yeah, absolutely. Internet forums can certainly give you ideas of feeds to look at. But, it's an idea, and you need to go do your due diligence and read all the labels and make sure that it really actually is a good fit for your horse.
And I know that everything on the tag is important. We just talked about that. Everything on there is important. But if someone's online doing research, or they're at the store, like, what do you think is the most important thing to look at first? Like, what's the takeaway here?
I really want to say all of it, but
I know.
I know you want me to say one thing, but I will just say that if they have a paper tag sewn on the bag, look at that first, because they're so small, there's no space on there for marketing gimmicks and hype, right, and pretty pictures. So it's just black and white text most of the time, and it's just facts. So don't, go there and don't get wooed by the bag. But if I had to pick one thing on the tag, it would probably be the feeding directions. Because if I was going to walk into my local feed store and walk down the aisle, and I realize many feed stores, you don't get to walk around the feed anymore. It's all out back in a shed somewhere, and you don't get to go back there. Although most feed stores will let you go back there if you ask. And you're walking down the aisles and you're looking at bags on racks. If you know already that your horse looks great just eating hay, then if you're turning over bags and looking at feeding directions, and the feeding directions start at 6 pounds a day for your size of horse, that's automatically going to be a no, because you don't need all those calories, right? Their weight is good. You're not looking for a lot of feed, right? So put that bag back down. Look for the bags that have serving sizes that make sense for your horse, maybe 1 pound a day. And maybe there's 3 of those there at your feed store from different manufacturers. Then you can kind of put those 3 bags together and look at them and compare them and do the deeper dive. Conversely, if you're going to the feed store because, your horse has lost some weight and you really need to kind of get their weight up, maybe, you are looking for the feed that has the minimum of like 6 pounds per day or whatever. So then don't go looking at the balances with the 1 pound a day serving size. Put together a collection of feeds that are there at the store that have serving sizes that you think would work for you, and then start drilling down on them. Like, where are their calories coming from? Are they a fat feed? Are they a fermentable fiber feed? How well fortified are they? Do they have, maybe you think your horse is losing weight. Maybe their hindgut's a little disrupted. Like, are they guaranteeing levels of gut health ingredients? Like, these kinds of things. This is how you start to kind of, weed it down. But I would probably start with the feeding directions, because at least it puts you in the right ballpark of feeds to compare.
For our listeners, if you'd like to be a part of our conversation, please send your suggestions for future topics and equine nutrition questions to info@scoopandscale.com, and is spelled out. You can also find Claire at clarityequine.com.
We know that if you're like us, you're probably listening to this while driving or doing barn chores. But when your hands are free, if you'd share it with your friends on social media, and be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, it helps other horse lovers like you to find us.
For the Scoop and Scale podcast, I'm Jill Jackson.
And I'm Dr. Claire Tunis.
Thanks for riding along with us.